Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're running an urgent scenario, a pre-mortem, really, on the world's logistics system. The date we keep seeing flash red in the data is 2026.
Mm,
And this isn't about some surprise shock we can't predict. This is about a structural failure that's already here, just waiting for a trigger.
that's right. And it's a dark premise, but, the sources really back it up. We're at a very strange inflection point.
How so?
Well, analysis that Lloyd's List reviewed shows that shipping investors are getting nervous. But they're not nervous about freight rates going down. They're actually worried about the current geopolitical upside disappearing in 2026.
The upside, you mean the high rates they're getting because of all the chaos?
Exactly. They fear that all this disruption will just curdle into a new kind of chaotic instability, not a return to anything efficient or, stable.
So the market itself is betting on chaos. That's our mission today. To synthesize the intelligence from the World Bank's Container Port Performance Index, the CPPI, from Chatham House, from Drury, and others to really pinpoint which ports are the most vulnerable and, frankly, why they're going to collapse first.
Okay, so let's start at, say, 30,000 feet. If we see a major failure in 2026, it's going to start where the system is thinnest. And that means the maritime choke points.
These narrow sea lanes that everything has to pass through.
Precisely. And the Chatham House analysis on this is critical. Their main finding is that our dependency on these points is actually increasing. It's not decreasing.
That feels completely backward. I mean, everything we've heard since the pandemic is about de-risking and localizing supply chains.
It flies in the face of that narrative, I know, especially for food security. Let me give you a number. Since the year 2000, the share of internationally traded grain and fertilizers that has to pass through at least one of these choke points, it's gone from 43% to 54%.
Wow, over half. A 54% reliance on just a few narrow passages.
Mm.
That sounds like a time bomb.
It is.
So which choke points are we talking about, the ones really holding the global food supply hostage?
We're looking at three main corridors. First, the Panama Canal, which is, as we know, already under incredible environmental stress. It's the key link for Western and Asian markets.
Right.
Second, the Strait of Malacca. This one is enormous. Over a quarter of all global soybean exports pass through there, mostly feeding China's demand.
And the third?
The Turkish Straits, they're absolutely essential for wheat. A full fifth of the world's wheat exports come out of the Black Sea region and through those straits.
And it's not just geopolitics pressing on these points, it's the environment, too.
Absolutely. That's the synergy that Chatham House highlights. Our dependence is going up, just as agricultural markets are getting tighter and more volatile.
Why?
Well, climate change is directly impacting crop yields, and we're seeing a really concerning trend of falling cereal yield growth overall. So you've got these two huge pressures rising reliance and shrinking safety margins, all hitting the same few bottlenecks.
And we've seen this play out before. I mean, Drury's analysis of the Russia-Ukraine war showed that when 20 million tons of grain got stuck in Ukraine, global food prices spiked 30% year over
And
year.
a devastating spike. And that's the kind of instability that could become the new baseline.
Okay, so that's the macro pressure. Let's pivot to the ground level. Who is failing right now based on the cold, hard numbers? Where can we actually see the structural failure happening?
Let's start in North America, because the performance data there is, frankly, deeply concerning. We're pulling from the World Bank and S&P's CPPI data for 2023.
The CPPI, yeah, it's the gold standard for measuring port efficiency, right?
It is. It's an objective measure of how long it takes from a ship arriving to its cargo leaving. And what it showed for North America was the largest regional deterioration globally
In what metric?
in average arrival time. That's the time from a vessel entering port limits to actually docking at the berth. That time increased by an average of 19.1 hours between 2022 and 2023.
Wait, 19 hours? Almost a full extra day just spent waiting to park the ship. That is staggering.
It's a staggering level of inefficiency, and it's why the specific port rankings are so abysmal. If you look at the 2023 CPPI for large U.S. ports, they are scraping the bottom of the barrel. Long Beach is 376th in the world.
376?
Los Angeles is 378th. Savannah is 398th. Even a key medium-sized port like Tacoma is all the way down at 42nd.
These are major American gateways, and they're being outperformed by almost every other major port in the world. It sounds like they're already failing.
And that stress is just as acute in Europe. The system there is just not prepared for repeated shocks. Looking at Northwest Europe, Drury's data showed these massive increases in total port time for the ultra-large vessels.
Give us the scale of it. How bad is the deterioration?
Le Havre in France was the worst. Its average port time just exploded from 1.7 days to 4.9 days.
That's almost triple, 193% increase.
It is. And Hamburg wasn't much better. It jumped 125%. Antwerp and Rotterdam also saw huge increases, around 98% and 86% respectively.
So you have ships sitting idle for days longer than they should be, costing millions. We always hear that it's just high cargo volume, but is that really the only reason for this collapse?
That's the key question. And no, it points to a much deeper lack of resilience. Drury's analysis clarified this. The increase isn't just because it's taking longer to unload the containers. It's heavily driven by a massive rise in what they call pre-berth waiting time.
What's the difference, practically speaking?
Well, extended working time means your system is busy, but it's still flowing. Massive pre-berth waiting time means your system is full. It's blocked. It can't manage the flow. To give you an example, at Antwerp in April 2022, that waiting time accounted for over half of the total time a ship spent at the port.
So that's not just congestion, that's operational paralysis.
It's paralysis just waiting to happen again in 2026.
Okay, so we have the macro stress, we have the empirical backlog data from the West. Let's get into the final ingredients for total collapse.
The internal failures, what breaks a port from the inside out? This is where we have to look at capacity, labor, and corruption, the human element.
And we saw a perfect real-time example of the labor risk just recently in Rotterdam.
We did. An update from October 2025 showed a Dutch court had to literally order Port of Rotterdam lashers, the workers who secure containers back to work. An extended strike had caused such massive congestion.
And that was compounded by other issues, right?
Right. You had slowdowns from Belgian pilot unions at the same time. It just shows how quickly that whole North European network can be pushed to the brink of collapse. The margin for error is razor thin.
And looking south to Brazil, the problem is more about pure capacity limits. Take Santos, the largest port in South America.
Drury's data showed Santos hit 80% capacity utilization all the way back in 2021.
And 80% is kind of the red line, isn't it?
It's the industrial benchmark that screams you need more capacity immediately. And on top of that, you have these huge macroeconomic risks in Brazil, high inflation, high cost of debt, which just adds another layer of instability to this critical regional hub.
But the ultimate structural failure, it seems, is in South Africa. The CPPI rankings were just shocking. Durban at 399th, Inqua at 404th. That's literally the bottom of the list.
Yeah, Drury highlighted those two specifically. They said these ports require private sector partners, not just for money, but because of deep systemic failures. We're talking fundamentally poor crane productivity and completely unaddressed labor issues.
So when a port ranks that low, it's not a temporary problem.
No, it's a signal of an operational core that will just fracture instantly under the next wave of global strain.
Okay, let's pivot to the most insidious vulnerability. This is where the intelligence briefing gets, well, really uncomfortable. The insider threat. A port collapsing isn't always a hurricane or a physical attack. It can be eaten away from the inside by corruption.
That's exactly right. The Global Financial Integrity Assessment shows that the community around the port is what determines its vulnerability to criminal organizations, especially drug trafficking organizations, or DTOs.
So they don't attack the gates, they target the people inside.
They target the people. And they look for two key vulnerabilities. The first is economic inequality, which is measured by the Gini coefficient.
Can you just briefly explain that? We hear that term a lot, but how does high inequality become a direct security threat to a port?
Of course, the Gini coefficient just tracks how wealth is distributed. The higher it is, the bigger the gap between the rich and poor. And the research is clear. In communities with high inequality, the poor are far more vulnerable to things like extortion and bribery.
So the criminal groups know where to look.
They know that in those communities surrounding a port, it's much easier to find an employee who is desperate enough to, say, look the other way or hand over an access card for a relatively small amount of cash.
So personal financial stress becomes a weaponized vulnerability. What's the second factor?
The debt-to-income ratio. The framework for tracking malicious insider threats always identifies high personal debt as a major red flag. DTOs actively seek out individuals in high-debt communities because they know those people are highly susceptible to bribery.
So a dock worker with crippling debt is a prime target. A few $100s in a bribe can bypass millions in security infrastructure. That's a chilling pathway to failure.
It is. And when you combine all of it, the high global demand, the aging infrastructure, the rising internal stress from labor and debt, and political instability, you get the perfect storm for a catastrophic, localized failure in 2026.
So putting this all together, what's the big picture? We have the macro pressure, the failing ports in the West, the internal risks. Is there any sign the system is going to stabilize on its own?
If you look at the financial forecast, the answer is a clear no. Sonida, for example, is still forecasting that container rates will remain structurally high.
Even with some of the political tensions easing.
Even with that, it suggests the problem isn't just temporary demand spikes or political spats anymore. The problems are now deeply embedded. There's structural failures in capacity, in labor, and in this domestic vulnerability we've been talking about.
And the political response to a potential crisis, especially a food crisis, could just make things worse.
That is the core warning from Chatham House. For energy security, we have all these international mechanisms. But for food choke point risk, there's a severe lack of coordinated governance.
Which means, what in a crisis?
It raises the prospect of uncoordinated unilateral responses, countries scrambling to secure their own supplies. Think export bans, protectionism actions that would only deepen the global disaster and hurt the most vulnerable nations first.
So for you, the well-informed listener, the mandate for 2026 is brutally clear. Waiting for global institutions to act is not a winning strategy. You have to reduce dependency now.
And according to the sources, that involves two critical long-term projects that have to start today. First, government have to undertake urgent national and subnational risk assessments of their choke point exposure.
And the second part.
This is where the investment has to pivot. Companies, international financial institutions, they have to commit to long-term investment that supports a diversified global grain production base. We simply have to reduce our reliance on a handful of exporting regions and their fragile coastal choke points.
So diversification is no longer just a luxury, a hedge against risk. It is the only real mechanism left to survive systemic supply chain failure in the coming years.